Since ancient times, trade has been an integral part of human life. According to Bridie Hing, the history of Indian trade is the history of trade for humankind. Silk route, the land route, and the spice route, the maritime route, were the ancient trade routes that dominated the world trade. The land route was mainly used for the trade of the silk, whereas spices were traded through the maritime routes. Spices such as cinnamon, pepper, ginger, cloves and nutmeg were traded through the spice routes. The spice routes were established around 3000 BCE, and this was 2000 years before the silk route was established. Spices were the most valued medicinal plants and were used for medicinal purposes during the ancient times. Their use in food became prevalent much later. Spices were among the valued luxurious items that were exchanged for Western commodities like gold and silver. However, other valuable goods were also exchanged across the spice routes, such as textiles, metalwork, saffron, incense, etc. Spice route remained a major sea route for trade and grew in importance with the coming of Europeans in India. Spice routes linked the east with the west as it stretched from Japan through Indonesia to India to the Middle Eastern lands to Europe through Mediterranean, covering a distance of 15,000 kilometers. As India was the leading producer of spices, it became the center of the world's spice trade. Spices became an important part of India's trade. Chinese, Egyptian, Mesopotamian and Arab civilizations. Even today, India tops the list of the spice-producing countries of the world. Around 70% of the global spices are produced in India. For almost 5,000 years, Arab traders had a monopoly over the spice trade till the Europeans searched for new routes to the Far East regions. The most lucrative of the spice traders during this time were the Arabians. South Arabia was the great spice emporium in antiquity. Spices were so valued once that people used to risk their lives just to trade in spices. Arab merchants who traded in spices would tell fantastic tales about their adventures in order to reach spice-growing regions. This would ensure high prices for the spices. Myths associated with phoenix, giant eagles, dragons were created around the spice-producing lands. The Greek historian Herodotus has mentioned how the spice cassia grew in a lake infested by winged creatures like bats, which screeched alarmingly and were very pugnacious. Such stories were made popular by the traders in order to hide the source of spices. India supplied spices to most of the European countries. Cochin and Malabar Coast were the leading producers of the pepper. In the coastal regions of Bay of Bengal, cloves were grown in huge quantity. In the medieval period, food spoiling was a major problem faced by the Europeans as they lacked the refrigeration and general hygiene. In such a situation, species became important as they helped to preserve the food for a long period of time. Species were so important that in the 16th century, dock workers in London used to get their bonuses in cloves. In another instance, Rome was captured by Visigoths in 410 AD. As ransom, Visigoths demanded around 3,000 pounds of peppercorns. In the Middle Ages, spice trade was among the most lucrative industries in the world. Many empires rose and fell around the spice routes. For India, along with wealth and knowledge, trade in spices brought invaders and colonizers too. Much of the history of the world revolves around the spices and the spice trade routes. Spices such as cloves are mentioned in the ancient religious text, Ramayana too. The Romans controlled all the spices which entered their territory through their trading center in Alexandria. Throughout the 1st century BC. In the following centuries, many battles were fought for control over the spice route. Finally, in the 13th century, Venice became the primary port for spice trade with Europe. Venice imposed high tariffs on spice trade and became enormously wealthy. However, this monopoly of Venice did not last long. In 1498, Vasco da Gama came to India through sea route. This led to domination of spice trade route by Portuguese for a short period of time. Portugal accumulated great wealth during this short phase. They established their monopoly over the spice route until the end of the 16th century when Dutch entered the picture and marked an end to their monopoly. However, England, which was a threat for Portuguese earlier, became an imminent danger for the Dutch because of their supreme naval power. Throughout the 17th and 18th century, the spice trade was dominated by the East India Company. With the colonization of the distant lands, the cultivation of spices was introduced by the colonizers in places outside of their land of origin. As a result, the prices of spices began to fall. Spices no longer remained an exclusive trade item around which wealthy monopolies were once established. Hence, the onset of globalization can be traced back to the spice trade. However, by the end of the 20th century, spices and spice route lost their significance, though spice trade is still important for the countries where they are produced. Spice routes in many ways paved the way for the modern world. Since ancient times, Indian Ocean has remained a strategic location in the maritime trade. India and China have been working towards making the Asian century a reality for themselves. Both India and China are the fastest growing economies of the world. Both the nations aim to become a world leader and are making efforts to take advantage of their strategic locations. Revitalizing the ancient spice route would not only provide a connect to our glorious past but would also provide a platform to revive our economic and cultural ties.